The last few months in our house, we've had this fan in our living room that every time you turn it on and it starts to oscillate, there's a noise that goes with that. It's like it's out of balance. There's a bearing that's not working properly. And so for the most part, we actually don't use it much at the moment until we get it fixed. Maybe you're one of these people that as soon as you see a picture in a room that's slightly askew, it really gets to you. Even if it's just out by a few millimeters, the balance and the fact that it's out of balance starts to become really annoying when we look at it. For me, it's music, and when there's an instrument that's too loud, or maybe it's out of tune, the balance is all wrong, and it really starts to kind of get to me, and I can't listen to music for too long if it's like that. I'm reading this book at the moment by Will Bryson, and he's one of my favourite authors, and the book is on the human body. And in the book he unpacks in a really accessible way all the elements, the many elements chemically that comprise the human body and our makeup. And he kind of emphasises that the balance within these elements in terms of their ratio and composition is really important to human functioning and flourishing. And if there's something out of balance, then often it can be critical. There's a thing called the anthropic principle, and this takes that same idea, but it expands it across the universe. And it basically says that that of all the things that comprise the universe and the balance of all essential elements within the universe, if just one of those things was out of whack, then life on Earth potentially couldn't be possible. Well, I wonder today if you've been feeling out of balance, particularly within the world at the moment, and as if there's an instrument that might be out of tune within our lives. It's fair to say that for many people, life has been completely turned upside down, and all throughout the world at the moment we have this experience in this unity of experience, whether it's health, our finances, our ability to recreate, our work, our social connections. It's all kind of changed in many ways, and it's like this forced detour that no one really saw coming and that no one wanted to take. It's hard to stay upright, it's hard to stay on course, to stay in tune, to stay balanced. When we look at Genesis, and in Genesis 1, there's this incredible poem which describes the creative activity of God as God composes the universe and orchestrates life itself. And you know, after God creates each day, it tells us that there was evening and there was morning and that it was good. And then on the seventh day, the story tells us that God rested. God rested. Now, why does a God who never sleeps or slumbers has to rest? Well, that's because the story actually is really importantly given for us. On each day, there was even a time where God created and actually did cease his creative work. But in a sense, the Creator rested not only after each day, but on the seventh day, creation was brought to its completion. And the Sabbath, this Sabbath day, the seventh day, was a full day devoted to rest. The idea of seven was really central to the ancient Hebrews, and it reflects fullness, completeness. On the seventh day, in a sense, God's presence fully fills all of creation. And the seventh day, known as the Sabbath, was where work is ceased, where we are to rest and enjoy God's presence and this good world. The Sabbath was foundational to the created order and the orchestrating of all of life. And the view of holiness for the Israelite people too was really central. And their notion of holiness was that they were separated from a large part of the activity of the rest of the week. And the law revealed a set of rules and instructions about what to do and what not to do, what was permissible and what wasn't permissible on the Sabbath. Sabbath rhythm shaped the Jewish nation in every way. It shaped their week, it shaped their worship, it shaped their annual festivals, which there were 7 of. Every 7 years, slaves were meant to be freed and debts were meant to be wiped. The land was meant to rest so it could be replenished and refreshed. And then 7 times 7, every Jubilee occasion, this principle was expounded on a larger scale. You know, our world is really different to the ancient Jewish times. And our lifestyles and our timetables are so diverse. But Sabbath, friends, is still a foundational aspect of all of life. Sabbath is actually bigger than any specific day. Sabbath rhythm is about rest, replenishing, restoring, recalibrating, resetting. Sabbath rest is about us being able to reorientate ourselves to the love of God with all of our heart, with all of our mind, with all of our soul, and with all of our strength, and to love others as ourselves. It's about paying attention to all of who we are, mind, body, and spirit, all of who God is, all of where we are going, and rediscovering where God actually wants us to go. I wonder, have you ever tried to dance in time when you can't hear the music? Or tried to drive straight and keep on the road when you're looking off to the side? Well, Sabbath helps us to hear the music so that we can dance with God, to train our eyes to look in the direction that God wants us to go. Sabbath is a rhythm that punctuates all of life. In the same way that a comma helps a sentence to make sense, Sabbath brings a sense of meaning and purpose to the unfolding story of life. The purpose of Sabbath is that we would find deeper relationship, not greater rituals. Deeper relationship with God, one another, and creation. In Luke's Gospel, the very first time that Jesus, in a sense, reveals his mission, his purpose, his identity even, is on the Sabbath. As he teaches and preaches from Isaiah, he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." Indeed, the life of Jesus showed us that there were so many conflicts with religious leaders, and that these conflicts were often around his actions on the Sabbath. For Jesus, he was seeking to expand people's view of what the Sabbath was really all about and challenge what it had wrongly become. Sabbath was a time for renewal, not burden. The worship of God had become exclusive and alienated from the will of God in some ways, healing the sick, setting the captives free. The Sabbath was to be kept holy, but holiness had come to be narrowly defined as being separated from the world. For Jesus, it was about being set apart to reach out to the world. For Jesus, the worship of God is embodied in the reaching out to a world in need, to bring restoration and freedom. The Sabbath was made for humankind, not humankind for the Sabbath. Friends, Sabbath is about rest and bringing rest to a restless world. Today is Palm Sunday. Just after the weekly Sabbath, the crowds cheered Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem at the start of Passover. From this experience, things deteriorated really badly as the week unfolded, from the triumph and praise of Jesus in the minds of most to them scorning and condemning him. Jesus is crucified and was buried on the day of preparation, the day before the next Sabbath. Can you imagine the feeling and experiences of the disciples on the Sabbath, the day after he was killed? They were crushed. They were alone. They were confused. They were lost. They were fearful. Their hopes were dashed. Belief in Jesus as their liberator, as their king to rule their nation and free them from their oppressors, was in that moment shown to be astonishingly wrong. Everything that they had based their lives upon, committed their everything to, was now gone. On the Sabbath, this holy day, dedicated to remembering God's majesty and faithfulness through his creation and covenant, all hope seemed lost. This holy day had become a day of despair and anguish. And yet we now know that even from the grave on that Sabbath day, Jesus wasn't actually defeated. Hope was not extinguished. There is a sense that Sabbath is the echo, the whisper that the redemptive work of God is still going on, even when we can't see it. Jesus indeed arose the day after Sabbath, on the first day of a new week. Jesus ushered in a new era, a new creation for all eternity. And he says to each of us today, friends, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." In Jesus, we can know divine Sabbath rest in restless times. So today, how do we experience the peace of Jesus, the shalom of Jesus? Friends, we need to live in the Sabbath rhythm of God, because Jesus is both the Prince of Shalom and the Lord of the Sabbath. If you feel out of balance, may you know the rest that only Jesus can give. May we be people of Sabbath rhythm to bring rest to a world in these restless times.